I guess that's where he got it from. We spoke for about 2 hours on 2 occasions. I believe he was completely honest with me. He seemed like a very straight-shooting man. His parting words were with me, and he died 2 months later, was that he was very pleased that there was actually anybody out there who was actually willing to believe what they had said, because he was pretty convinced the whole world thought that they were nuts. And I got to tell you, that made an impact, which is why I took a lot of time out of my professional life to do this. I also interviewed Ray Esterly. Now, I'm very fortunate. I live about 12 miles from this gentleman in my town. He was the Salem police officer, one of the 2 that saw the jets. I won't go into his statement. Basically, he didn't see it up close, but he reported seeing the jets. He's still available. If you go down there and buy him a cup of coffee, he'll gladly tell you the story. He's a municipal bailiff now for the municipal court in Salem, Ohio. I also interviewed Betty Raymond, who was the waitress, and I also interviewed Thelma Jones, who was the woman who called the report in. They're both still alive. Chuck has passed away. The cook, he's no longer with us. Their interviews are also in the book. But needless to say, they all corroborated each other's stories. Now, from my point of view, I'll tell you that those little squiggly lines you saw on the graphs there mean more to me than their stories, though. Because as a scientist, I can't examine their statements, and I can't do an experiment on their statements, and I can't do a statistical analysis on it, and all the boring things that archaeologists do. So, but I will say that it's important in its own way, and that's why I don't poo-poo necessarily documents and statements. But you got to understand, from my perspective, they don't hold the weight of something I can test. So I guess I'm skeptical, but I'm not a debunker. But I am skeptical. I approach everything that way. So what does a disinterested archaeologist like me, who's a former law enforcement officer, actually think of all this? Well, what I can tell you that I would be willing to say as expert testimony on a stand, the object they observed, chased, and left behind a great deal of physical evidence. It was not a re-entering satellite, nor was it Venus. There were far more witnesses than either the government or NICAP admitted to or knew about. Sheriff Dustman wanted a covert investigation done. 2 F-102 interceptors were actually scrambled, encountered the object, which was flying too slow for them to stay behind, all of which was later denied by the Air Force. And incidentally, and this isn't part of that, just came to mind, when I dug up the documents, I actually found the letter, and I don't know how Detective Smith got this. It must have been a pretty good piece of detective work, but a letter written by this, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Quintanilla, to the district, the regional, I guess, wing commander of the Air Force, instructing that general to squelch, was the term, what that colonel had told the sheriff's department. I don't know what you mean, but squelch is pretty clear to me. Squelch that. I know what I would do. One witness was physically injured by this conolite, which seems especially strange for a nice planet like Venus to do. The car reported by Mrs. Raymond matches that reported by Deputies Spar and Neff at the first encounter scene. Perhaps most... by the way, this is an F-102 actually at the Youngstown Air Base. I found this in the archives of the newspaper. So that's actually a jet there. And these are what they sent up after this thing. Oh, that looks pretty formidable. But I can understand why that probably couldn't fly at just 100 miles an hour to stay behind them if you've got to use a parachute when you land. But pretty ominous looking. I guess that's typical Cold War National Guard stuff there. But I think one of the things that to me is most intriguing, and this is where I really hope a serious ufologist or layperson can pick this up and go with it, because it's certainly not my expertise, is if I had gone to the trouble as sheriff to start a covert investigation of myself. Now, I'm making an assumption here, but I would assume it was to cover mine and my deputies' butts against just such things as the government investigators, as he called them. And what's interesting is, obviously, a lot of information and physical evidence was collected that refutes the allegations that these guys were just crazy, they were making the story up. Yet he didn't release it. I mean, if any of you have heard any of this information, let me know. But I've searched newspapers. So why would you go to the trouble to use taxpayer money and do an extensive investigation, which turns up information that vindicates your officers, and then not say, here it is. So quit calling my officers crazy. That strikes me as singular. I don't know why he didn't. Hopefully, one of you can get to the answer to that. Strange also was the incidental evidence of, this car that he described also being described by the civilian witnesses who were at the Circle restaurant, and that the car actually arrived before the UFO chase was over. I thought, how would the Air Force be there telling them what you saw wasn't there, that they later denied? Would you, as the Air Force, send a couple of guys out, I guess would be my question, to drive around rural Ohio, just in case you stop somewhere to get a cup of coffee at 5 in the morning and tell someone what they saw was Venus? Yes. Okay. I'm told I'm running out of time, but that's okay. I guess what we're going to have to skip, unfortunately, then would be Phyllis's information. But I'll have that with me if anybody wants to look at it afterwards. But so what I want to do now is entertain some questions. And like I said, the material I had on this could be a several hundred-page book on many different aspects. But what interests me and excites me as a scientist is I've got stuff I can look at. This has got physical evidence that I can sink my teeth into. Again, I'll have Phyllis's PowerPoint available if anybody wants to see it. I'm here through tomorrow. I'll gladly show it to you. But do I have any questions? And if you do, please come up to the microphone. Thank you.
Michael,
Try it now.
everybody hear me? Michael, I have no questions. I just want to congratulate you on being a scientist and having an open mind.
Thank you. And I would say, and I'm very biased this way because I don't just use this with UFO stuff. If you don't have an open mind, you really ought to look for another line of work. Call me silly. Well, let me tell you, how many times have I had people come up? I can tell you stories about ancient astronomy. I mean, when you're an archaeologist, you run into a lot of stuff. And I found that to poo-poo the public is really shooting yourself in the foot. What I want to do is have the general public behind what I'm doing. So if I ignore the stuff that interests the general public, in the end, am I serving myself? Probably not. Any questions? I'm sorry, what was that? Okay, she asked, what is the name of the book? The name of the book is In Pursuit of Truth, and it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek because it's about a pursuit. And it'll be coming out. The only thing they're waiting on is my Ohio EMA report to go in the appendix. The whole thing in its entirety is sitting down at the printer, and it'll be out in December. And incidentally, if anybody would be interested in that book, or if any of you are serious researchers and want to look at this material, please grab me. I'll give you a card. You can come out to my house and review this stuff. Why don't you come over here so they can hear you? I'm being told they want to hear this.
Yes, the metal sample that you had, they said that was radioactive. What type of element exactly was it?
Okay, could you say that again?
What was the radioactive element with the metal sample that you had?
What we're waiting for is the analysis of which element that is. All they said in the general analysis was that it was a gamma emitter.
How much radiation was it putting out? What was the level?
It was in rads, not microrads. That's all I can recall. Okay. And he's, like I said, I'm waiting for the actual report because the guy basically, how I got this information from Ohio was I sent down the sample, and usually about a year later you'll get a report. I sent down the sample, and about 2 weeks later got this frantic email like, how much did you handle this? You know, and I know the guy. I used to be the deputy director for EMA in Portage County, so he knows me. He's like, Michael, did you let your kids play with this or anything? And I'm like, well, no, why? And he's like, it's really radioactive.
What did they do with the sample?
Well, it's in the lab at Ohio EMA in Columbus, Ohio. It's still, and they've informed me I'm not getting it back because of the level of radiation. I mean, it takes an NRC, a Nuclear Regulatory Commission certification that handle that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? I mean, if you could get up here. If not, just speak loud. I can repeat it.
The car with the antennas on it have a license plate so it could be traced to the original owner.
He wanted to know if the car had a license plate that could be traced. Deputy Spower, and I asked him about that, and that's a good question. Deputy Spower said it did have a license plate, but because it was abandoned and the situation unfolding as it did, the deputy at the rear of the vehicle, who was Barney, would have been the one to call that in. They didn't have walkie-talkies, so they were going to check the car to see if there was any threat to them first, and then he was going to call it in. And no, he didn't get that far. He turned around and he said he completely forgot about anything like what. In fact, he forgot about the car. By the end of the chase, he remembering the car was incidental. Yes.
Hi, I'm from a rural area too, and I'm trying to imagine these hundreds of witnesses in the middle of the night. So there were sirens. It doesn't mention, it mentions going across 4 counties, but you don't mention any towns.
Well, the biggest town that it went through would be Pittsburgh.
Okay. Oh, well.
So it's where the chase terminated is a suburb of, it's Conway, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
So
That
most
would
of their
explain it.
witnesses were from Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're